The town of Dusty Creek looked like it was slowly dying under the relentless Texas sun. Caleb Rivers rode down the main street on his tired horse, counting maybe 20 buildings total, a saloon, general store, bank, jail, and a handful of houses scattered like thrown dice across the dusty ground. The kind of place a man could disappear in, which was exactly what Caleb needed. He was 42 years old, with graying hair and the kind of lean build that came from years of hard living. His gun belt showed wear from constant use, and there was something in his pale green eyes that made people look away. The haunted look of a man who'd killed too many times to sleep peacefully. Caleb tied his horse outside Murphy's saloon and pushed through the batwing doors. The interior was dim and cool, offering blessed relief from the heat. A handful of locals nursed their drinks, their conversation dying as the stranger entered. "Whiskey," Caleb said to the bartender, a nervous-looking man with thinning hair. "2 bits," the bartender replied, his voice shaky as he poured the drink. Caleb placed a silver dollar on the bar, far more than necessary. "Keep the bottle handy. And I'm looking for someone." "Who might that be?" asked a voice from behind him. Caleb turned to see a man with a sheriff's badge, probably in his 50s, with steady brown eyes and the confident posture of someone who'd survived many dangerous situations. "Sheriff Ben Cooper," the lawman introduced himself. "And you are?" "Caleb Rivers." The name hung in the air like gunsmoke. Cooper's expression hardened, and several of the other patrons quietly made their way toward the exit. "The Caleb Rivers?" Cooper asked. "The gunfighter?" "Used to be," Caleb replied, taking a sip of whiskey. "Now I'm just a man looking for someone." "Who?" Caleb reached into his vest and pulled out a creased photograph, a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. "My daughter, Lucy. She'd be 23 now. Last letter I got said she was married to a rancher named Thomas Warren, living somewhere in this area." Cooper studied the photograph, his expression softening slightly. "Tom Warren's got a spread about 5 miles north of here. Good man, hard worker. But I don't recall him having a wife." Caleb's heart sank. "How long has he been here?" "About 2 years. Came here alone, never mentioned any family." "Maybe she uses a different name now," Caleb said desperately. "Maybe she doesn't want people to know her father is a killer," Cooper finished bluntly. The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. He'd spent 15 years building a reputation as one of the deadliest gunfighters in the West, and now that reputation was a wall between him and his daughter. "I haven't seen Lucy since she was 8 years old," Caleb said quietly. "Her mother took her away after I killed a man in a fair fight. Said she didn't want her daughter growing up around violence." "Maybe she was right," Cooper said. "Maybe. But Lucy's all the family I got left. I just want to see her, make sure she's all right." Cooper poured himself a drink, studying Caleb carefully. "Rivers, your reputation precedes you. 15 men dead in gunfights, most of them fair fights, but dead is dead. What makes you think your daughter wants to see you?" "I don't know if she does," Caleb admitted. "But I'm dying, Sheriff. Doc in El Paso says I got maybe 6 months, maybe less. Lung fever. Before I go, I need to know she's safe and happy." The revelation changed the atmosphere in the saloon. Cooper's hostility faded, replaced by something approaching sympathy. "That's a hard piece of news," Cooper said, "but it doesn't change the fact that your presence here could bring trouble. Men like you attract challenges from young guns looking to make a reputation." "I'm not looking for trouble, Sheriff. I just want to find my daughter." Before Cooper could respond, the saloon doors burst open and 3 men strode in. They had the swagger of hired guns, with tied-down holsters, and the kind of arrogance that came from thinking they were faster than they actually were. The leader was a young man with black hair and cold blue eyes. "Well, well," he said loudly, "if it isn't the famous Caleb Rivers. I'm Jake Morrison, and I've been looking for you for a long time." Caleb sighed and set down his whiskey glass. "I don't know you, son. But I know you. You killed my brother Billy in Abilene 3 years ago." Caleb remembered the fight, a drunk kid who'd called him out in front of a crowd. Billy Morrison had been fast but reckless, and Caleb had tried to talk him out of the confrontation. But the boy wouldn't listen, and when he drew first, Caleb had no choice but to defend himself. Your brother drew first, Caleb said. It was a fair fight. Fair fight. Morrison laughed harshly. He was 19 years old. Old enough to make his own choices. Old enough to face the consequences. Morrison's hand moved toward his gun. Well, now it's time for you to face yours. Stand down, Morrison, Sheriff Cooper warned, his own hand moving to his weapon. I won't have gunfights in my town. This is between Rivers and me, Sheriff, Morrison said, never taking his eyes off Caleb. Unless you want to make it your business to. Caleb stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. Sheriff, this is my fight. No need for you to get involved. Rivers, you don't have to do this, Cooper said. Yes, I do. Caleb looked at Morrison and his two companions. But not here. Too many innocent people could get hurt. Scared, Morrison taunted. Careful, Caleb replied. There's a difference. They agreed to meet in the street in 1 hour. As the Morrison gang left to prepare, Caleb finished his whiskey and checked his gun, a ritual he'd performed dozens of times over the years. You don't look like a man who's afraid, Cooper observed. I'm not afraid of dying, Caleb said. I'm afraid of dying before I see my daughter. Then walk away. Leave town now. Caleb shook his head. Morrison will follow me. Men like him always do. Better to settle it here than risk bringing trouble to wherever Lucy is. Cooper studied Caleb's face, seeing something there that surprised him. You've changed, haven't you? You're not the same man who built that reputation. 15 years of killing changes a man, Sheriff. Makes you realize that every bullet you fire takes something away from you, too. Then why keep fighting? Caleb smiled grimly. Because sometimes fighting is the only way to protect the people you love. As the hour approached, word spread through Dusty Creek about the impending gunfight. People lined the street at a safe distance, eager to witness a piece of frontier legend. Caleb walked out into the dusty main street, the sun beating down mercilessly, his shadow sharp and black on the ground. Morrison and his men were waiting, positioned about 30 yards away. The younger man's confidence was evident in his stance, but Caleb could see the slight tremor in his gun hand, the sign of nerves that often got young gunfighters killed. Last chance to walk away, Morrison, Caleb called out. The only one walking away will be me, Morrison replied. Sheriff Cooper stood on the porch of his office, his rifle ready in case Morrison's companions tried to interfere. The street was silent except for the whisper of wind and the distant cry of a hawk. Drawl, Morrison shouted, his hand flashing toward his gun. Caleb's drawl was smooth and unhurried, the result of years of practice and dozens of life-or-death situations. His Colt cleared leather and fired just as Morrison's gun was coming level. Morrison staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt. He tried to raise his gun for another shot, but his strength failed him, and he collapsed in the dust. His two companions started to draw, but Sheriff Cooper's rifle spoke from the porch. Touch those guns and you're dead men. The two gunmen froze, their hands inches from their weapons. After a moment, they slowly raised their hands and stepped away from their fallen leader. Caleb walked over to Morrison, who was still alive but fading fast. The young man looked up at him, with eyes full of pain and confusion. Why? Morrison whispered. Why were you so much faster? Because I didn't want to be here, Caleb said gently. And you did. Anger makes you slow, son. I learned that a long time ago. Morrison tried to speak again, but the words never came. He died there in the dust of Dusty Creek's main street, another casualty of the West's code of violence. As the crowd dispersed and Sheriff Cooper arrested Morrison's companions, Caleb stood alone in the street, feeling older than his 42 years. Another young man was dead because of his reputation. Another family would grieve because of his guns. That was some shooting, Cooper said, approaching with handcuffs for the surviving gunman. It was a waste, Caleb replied. That boy died for nothing. Just the ghost of a brother who made his own bad choices. Maybe, but he made his choice too. Caleb holstered his gun and looked toward the north, where Tom Warren's ranch lay somewhere in the distance. Sheriff, about my daughter. I'll ride out to Warren's place with you tomorrow, Cooper said. Help you find the answers you're looking for. Why would you do that? Cooper was quiet for a moment. Because I've got a daughter too. And I'd want someone to help me find her if I was in your situation. As the sun set over Dusty Creek, painting the desert sky in shades of red and gold, Caleb Rivers prepared for what might be the most important meeting of his life, if Lucy was even there to be found. The Warren Ranch sat in a small valley about 5 miles north of Dusty Creek, with a modest house, a barn, and several corrals containing horses and cattle. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the place had the well-maintained look of a working operation run by someone who took pride in their land. Caleb and Sheriff Cooper rode up to the house, just as a man emerged from the barn. Tom Warren was in his 30s, with brown hair and the solid build of someone who'd spent his life doing physical work. He watched the approaching riders, with the wariness common to isolated ranchers. "Morning, Tom," Sheriff Cooper called out as they dismounted. "Like you to meet someone." Warren's eyes fixed on Caleb, taking in the worn gun belt and the hard lines around his eyes. "Sheriff, what brings you out here?" "This is Caleb Rivers," Cooper said. "He's looking for his daughter. Thought she might have married you." Warren's expression didn't change, but Caleb caught something. A flicker of recognition, maybe, or concern. "Don't know anyone named Rivers," Warren said carefully. Caleb pulled out the photograph of Lucy. "Her name might be different now. Lucy Rivers, but she could be using another name." Warren glanced at the photograph, and this time there was no mistaking the recognition in his eyes. But instead of acknowledgement, there was fear. "Never seen her," Warren said, too quickly. "Tom," Sheriff Cooper said gently, "we're not here to cause trouble. This man just wants to know if his daughter is safe." "I told you, I don't know anyone by that name." Warren's hand drifted toward the rifle leaning against the porch rail. Caleb held up his hands peacefully. "Mr. Warren, I can see you know something. I'm not here to hurt anyone or cause problems. I'm dying, and I need to know my daughter is all right." For a moment, Warren's resolve seemed to waver. Then a voice called from inside the house. "Tom, who's there?" It was a woman's voice, and Caleb's heart nearly stopped. Even after 15 years, even changed by time and circumstance, he recognized it. That was Lucy. "Nobody important, honey," Warren called back, but his voice was strained. "Just a sheriff and a visitor." The front door opened, and she stepped out onto the porch. Lucy Rivers, now Lucy Warren, had grown into a beautiful woman, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun and kind brown eyes that were exactly like her mother's. She wore a simple dress and an apron, and there was something about her that spoke of contentment and peace. Until she saw Caleb. The color drained from her face, and she gripped the porch railing for support. For a long moment, father and daughter stared at each other across 15 years of separation and pain. "Hello, Lucy," Caleb said softly. "You," she whispered. "What are you doing here?" "I was looking for you. I got your letter about getting married, but the trail went cold after that." Lucy's eyes darted to her husband, then back to Caleb. "I don't want you here." The words hit Caleb like bullets, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I just wanted to see you, to know you were safe and happy." "Safe?" Lucy laughed bitterly. "How can I be safe when my father is Caleb Rivers, the gunfighter? When men like Jake Morrison come looking for you?" Caleb's blood ran cold. "Morrison was here? 3 weeks ago," Tom Warren said grimly. "Came looking for you, asking questions about your family. When he found out Lucy was here. He threatened us," Lucy finished. "Said he'd come back and kill us both if we didn't tell him where to find you." "So you told him I might be in Dusty Creek?" Lucy nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, but he said he'd burn down the ranch, kill Tom, hurt me. I was scared." Caleb felt sick. His reputation, his past, had brought danger to the one person he most wanted to protect. "Lucy, I'm sorry. I never meant for my problems to find you." "But they did," she said angrily. "They always do. Do you know what it's been like, growing up as the daughter of a famous killer? Always having to hide, always having to lie about who I am. I know I wasn't the father you deserved. You weren't a father at all." Lucy's composure finally broke. You chose your guns over your family. You chose your reputation over your daughter. The accusations were like physical blows, but Caleb knew they were true. He told himself for years that he was doing what he had to do, that he was protecting his family by staying away. But the truth was simpler and more painful. He'd chosen the violent life because it was easier than the hard work of being a husband and father. You're right, Caleb said quietly. I failed you. I failed your mother. I chose violence over family, and I've regretted it every day since. Regret doesn't bring back 15 years, Lucy said. No, it doesn't. But maybe I can still do something right. Tom Warren stepped protectively closer to his wife. What do you mean? Morrison had 2 men with him yesterday. They're in jail now, but there might be others. And my reputation, it'll keep bringing trouble to your door as long as people know you're my daughter. So what are you suggesting? Sheriff Cooper asked. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. I'm suggesting that Caleb Rivers needs to disappear. Permanently. Lucy stared at him. You mean fake your death? I mean really die. To the world, anyway. Take a new name. Go somewhere nobody knows me. And live whatever time I have left as a different man. And leave us alone again, Lucy said bitterly. Leave you safe, Caleb corrected. If Caleb Rivers is dead, then nobody will come looking for his family. Tom Warren spoke up for the first time in several minutes. Lucy's told me about you, about what you were like before you became what you became. She said you used to be a good man. I tried to be. Then maybe it's not too late to be that man again. Lucy looked at her husband in surprise. Tom, what are you saying? I'm saying that maybe your father deserves a chance to know his daughter. And maybe you deserve a chance to know him. The real him, not the legend. He's a killer, Tom. Yes, he is. But he's also a man who rode hundreds of miles just to make sure you were safe. A man who's willing to give up his identity to protect you from the consequences of his past. Sheriff Cooper had been listening to the exchange with growing interest. There might be a way to make this work, he said slowly. What do you mean? Caleb asked. Well, Jake Morrison came here specifically to kill Caleb Rivers. And now Jake Morrison is dead. If word got out that he succeeded, that both of you killed each other in that gunfight, then as far as the world knows, Caleb Rivers is finished. Lucy looked intrigued despite herself. You do that? Fake your own death. If it meant you could live in peace, yes. And then what? You disappear forever. Caleb looked at his daughter, seeing not the angry woman who'd confronted him, but the little girl he'd lost 15 years ago. I was hoping maybe I could stay nearby. Not as Caleb Rivers, but as someone else. A ranch hand, maybe, or a drifter looking for work. You want to work for us? Tom asked. I want to know my daughter. I want to help her build the life she deserves. And I want to make up for 15 years of being absent. Lucy was quiet for a long time, weighing the proposal. Finally, she looked at her husband. Tom, what do you think? I think every man deserves a second chance, Tom replied. And I think every daughter deserves to know her father. Even a father like him. Especially a father like him. Because he's the only father you'll ever have. Word spread quickly through Dusty Creek. Caleb Rivers was dead. Sheriff Cooper had returned to town with the story that the famous gunfighter had died of his wounds from the fight with Jake Morrison, succumbing to internal bleeding several hours after the confrontation. Both men had died, the sheriff reported, ending a cycle of violence that had claimed too many lives. The townspeople received the news with mixed emotions. Some were relieved that the dangerous gunfighter was gone. Others were disappointed that they wouldn't have more exciting stories to tell. But everyone agreed that Dusty Creek could return to its peaceful existence now that the violence had moved on. What they didn't know was that Caleb Rivers sat in Sheriff Cooper's office, very much alive, and working on his transformation into someone else entirely. Name? Cooper asked, filling out false identity papers. Frank Collins, Caleb replied. He'd chosen the name carefully. Frank had been his middle name, and Collins was his mother's maiden name. Occupation? Ranch hand. Drifter looking for steady work. Cooper nodded and continued writing. This should hold up to casual inspection, but if anyone digs too deep, they won't, Caleb said. Frank Collins is going to be a very quiet, unremarkable man. What about your guns? Caleb looked down at the weapon that had defined his life for so many years. Caleb Rivers was fast with a gun. Frank Collins is just competent enough to protect himself and others when necessary. And if someone recognizes you? After 15 years of hard living and 6 months of dying from lung fever, I don't look much like the portraits they draw in the dime novels. Add some gray to my hair, change the way I dress and talk, and I should be able to pass for just another aging cowboy. Cooper sealed the identity papers and handed them to Caleb. Frank Collins, born in Missouri, been drifting through Texas for the past few years. Your story is that you heard Tom Warren might need help with his ranch. Thank you, Sheriff, for everything. Don't thank me yet. The hard part's just beginning. Living a quiet life is harder than you think for a man like you. Caleb, Frank now nodded. I know, but I've got something to live for now that I haven't had in 15 years. Your daughter. My daughter. And the chance to finally be the man she needed me to be. 3 days later, Frank Collins rode up to the Warren Ranch, leading a pack horse and carrying a letter of introduction from Sheriff Cooper. He looked like dozens of other drifters who'd passed through the area over the years, weathered, tired, but capable. Tom Warren met him at the corral, playing his part perfectly. You the fellow Sheriff Cooper wrote about? Yes, sir. Frank Collins. I understand you might have work for a man willing to put in an honest day's labor. Depends. You any good with horses? Good enough. Been working ranches most of my life. Lucy watched from the kitchen window as her husband and her father, now Frank, discussed the terms of employment. The transformation was remarkable. Even knowing who he really was, she could barely recognize the legendary gunfighter in this quiet, respectful ranch hand. Wage is $30 a month plus room and board, Tom was saying. You'll bunk in the small cabin behind the barn. Work starts at dawn, ends at sunset, with Sunday afternoons off. Sounds fair, Frank replied. One more thing, Tom added, lowering his voice. My wife, she's had some trouble with strangers in the past. Men who thought they could take advantage of a woman on an isolated ranch. I'd appreciate it if you kept your distance from her unless work requires otherwise. Frank nodded understanding. Of course, a man's wife deserves respect and protection. And so Frank Collins began his new life on the Warren Ranch. He was a model employee, quiet, hard-working, and skilled with animals. He kept to himself, took his meals alone in his cabin, and never gave Tom or Lucy any reason for complaint. But in the evenings, when the work was done and Tom was in town on errands, Lucy would sometimes find herself talking to Frank as he tended to the horses. At first, their conversations were stilted and formal, but gradually, they began to open up to each other. You're different than I expected, Lucy said one evening as Frank brushed down Tom's favorite mare. Different how? Quieter, more gentle. The stories about Caleb Rivers made him sound like a wild man, barely human. Frank paused in his brushing. Maybe that's because the stories were about what he did, not who he was. And who was he? Frank resumed his work, considering his words carefully. He was a man who made terrible choices, who let anger and pride lead him down a dark path, who lost everything that mattered because he thought being feared was more important than being loved. Do you think he ever regretted it? Every day, especially after he realized what he'd lost. Lucy was quiet for a moment. I used to wonder what my life would have been like if he'd stayed, if he'd chosen family over violence. Different, Frank said. Maybe better, maybe worse, but different. Do you think people can really change? Really become someone else? Frank looked at her directly for the first time in weeks. I think people can choose to be better than they were. Whether that's the same as changing, I don't know. As the weeks passed, Frank proved his worth not just as a ranch hand, but as a protector. When rustlers tried to steal cattle, his quick thinking and shooting, good enough to discourage them, but not so exceptional as to raise suspicions, saved the herd. When a cougar threatened the horses, he tracked it down and killed it with a single shot. But it was the small things that mattered most to Lucy. The way he fixed a loose board on her front steps without being asked. The way he always tipped his hat when she brought him water during hot afternoons. The way he listened when she talked about her dreams for the ranch, her hopes for the future. Slowly, carefully, Frank Collins was building the relationship that Caleb Rivers had never been able to have with his daughter. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, brought by the weekly mail rider from Dusty Creek. Tom Warren read it twice before walking out to the corral, where Frank was breaking in a new horse. "Frank," Tom called. "Need to talk to you." Frank secured the horse and walked over, noting the serious expression on Tom's face. "Problem? Maybe. Got a letter from my cousin in El Paso. Says there's been talk about Caleb Rivers, about whether he's really dead." Frank felt his blood run cold. What kind of talk? Seems some folks are saying the whole thing was staged. That Rivers is still alive somewhere, hiding under a false name. "Any specifics?" Tom shook his head. "Just rumors so far. But my cousin says there's a bounty hunter named Carson Black who's been asking questions. Professional manhunter with a reputation for finding people who don't want to be found." Frank absorbed this information, his mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. "How much time do we have?" "Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be days." Then it's time for Frank Collins to move on. "You do that? Leave just when you're getting to know Lucy." Frank looked toward the house, where Lucy was hanging laundry on the line. Over the past 3 months, they'd grown closer than he'd ever dared hope. She'd started calling him Frank without the formal Mr. Collins, had begun including him in family conversations, had even laughed at his dry jokes. "If it keeps her safe, yes." "Or," Tom said slowly, "there might be another way." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to face this head-on." Before Frank could respond, Lucy approached them, having noticed their serious conversation. "What's wrong?" Tom handed her the letter, and Frank watched her face change as she read it. When she finished, she looked at him with a mixture of fear and determination. "So what do we do?" she asked. "I leave," Frank said. "Tonight. Disappear before this Carson Black gets close." "No." Lucy's voice was firm. "I won't let you run again." "Lucy, you don't understand. If they find me here. If they find you here, we'll deal with it. Together. As a family." The word family hit Frank like a thunderbolt. In all his years of violence and wandering, he'd forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere, to have people who would stand with him. "You don't know what you're saying," Frank said. "Carson Black isn't some young gun looking to make a reputation. He's a professional, and he's dangerous." "Then we'd better be ready for him," Tom said. That evening, the three of them sat around the kitchen table, planning for a confrontation that seemed inevitable. Frank, who was gradually becoming Caleb again as the crisis approached, outlined what they were likely facing. "Black will come with evidence," he said. "Photographs, descriptions, maybe even witnesses who knew me in the old days. Once he's convinced I'm here, he'll try to take me alive. The bounty's bigger for live capture." "How do we stop him?" Lucy asked. "We don't fight him," Caleb said. "We convince him he's wrong." "How?" Caleb smiled grimly. "By proving that Caleb Rivers is dead." The plan they devised was simple but risky. When Carson Black arrived, and they all agreed he would, they would acknowledge that Frank Collins bore a resemblance to the dead gunfighter, but maintain that he was just an unfortunate drifter who'd been mistaken for the famous killer before. "It's thin," Tom admitted. "It's all we've got," Caleb replied. Carson Black arrived 2 days later, riding into the Warren Ranch like a man who owned the world. He was tall and lean, with cold gray eyes, and the kind of confidence that came from never having failed to find his quarry. Behind him rode 2 associates, hard men with the look of professional killers. "Tom Warren," Black called out as the family emerged from the house. "That's me. What can I do for you?" "Carson Black. I'm looking for a man named Caleb Rivers. I have reason to believe he's working on your ranch under the name Frank Collins." "Frank," Tom laughed. "You think Frank is Caleb Rivers? Mister, you're barking up the wrong tree." Black dismounted and approached Frank, studying his face carefully. "You do bear a remarkable resemblance to the wanted posters." "So I've been told," Frank replied calmly. "Gets me in trouble sometimes, people thinking I'm someone I'm not." "Where you from, Frank Collins?" "Missouri originally. Been drifting through Texas for the past few years." Black pulled out a photograph, an old daguerreotype of Caleb taken years earlier. "This look familiar?" Frank studied the image with apparent interest. "I can see why you'd think there's a resemblance. But mister, I've never killed anybody in my life." "Prove it." This was the moment they prepared for. Frank drew his gun, not with the lightning speed of Caleb Rivers, but with the competent but unremarkable skill of an average ranch hand. He fired 6 shots at a fence post 20 yards away, hitting it 5 times. "Not bad shooting," Black admitted, "but nothing exceptional." "Good enough to discourage coyotes and rustlers," Frank replied, holstering his weapon. Black wasn't convinced. "I'd like to see your identification papers." Frank produced the documents Cooper had prepared, and Black examined them carefully. For several tense minutes, the bounty hunter studied the papers, looking for signs of forgery. "These look legitimate," Black said finally. "They are legitimate," Lucy spoke up. "Frank's been working for us for 3 months. He's a good worker and an honest man." Black looked at her sharply. "You seem pretty defensive of your hired hand, Mrs. Warren. I don't like strangers coming onto my property and making accusations against people who work for us." For another hour, Black questioned them, probed their story, and looked for inconsistencies. But their preparation held up, and gradually, the bounty hunter's certainty began to waver. "I still think there's something not right here," Black said as he prepared to leave. "Well, when you figure out what it is, you come back," Tom replied. "But don't expect us to be happy about being bothered again." After Black and his men rode away, the 3 of them stood in the yard, hardly daring to believe they'd succeeded. "Think that's the end of it?" Tom asked. "Maybe," Caleb said, "but we should be ready in case it's not." Lucy looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. "You're not Frank Collins anymore, are you?" "No," Caleb admitted. "For a while there, I thought maybe I could be. But Frank Collins was just another disguise, another way of hiding from who I really am." "And who are you really?" Caleb considered the question, the same question he'd been running from for 15 years. "I'm your father. I'm a man who made terrible mistakes and hurt the people he loved. But I'm also a man who's trying to do better, trying to be worthy of a second chance." Lucy was quiet for a long moment. Then she stepped forward, and, for the first time since he'd returned to her life, she embraced him. "I forgive you," she whispered. "I forgive you for leaving, for choosing violence, for all the years we lost. But I need you to forgive yourself too." Standing there in his daughter's arms, surrounded by the life he'd helped build and protect, Caleb Rivers finally understood what redemption felt like. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending his mistakes didn't matter. It was about choosing to be better, choosing to build instead of destroy, choosing love over fear. "I love you, Lucy," he said, the words he'd been unable to speak for 15 years, finally finding their voice. "I love you too, Dad."